Senator, what do you hope to hear from the President tonight?
Yeah. So I think it's obviously incumbent upon our President to talk about why this issue is so important to our own national interest, and I think that'll be easy for him to do. I hope, secondly, though, he will lay out how he plans to go about it, a strategy, and what his objectives are. I think it's very important for all of us to understand how he plans to go about doing this. It's pretty easy to see how we can build on some of the elements in Iraq right now with the Iraq military, as weak as they are, the Peshmerga, the Kurds force. We understand there are Shia militias there that we can build off, and I'm talking about on-the-ground activities. What is far more difficult is to understand how we go about what we may need to do and do need to do in Syria. And we don't have that same support on the ground. And that's the one area that no one at the administration has been able to share a coherent strategy to deal with. So I hope he will clearly lay those out tonight. I hope he will cause the American people to understand why ISIS is such a threat to our nation over time and the stability of the world, but also, again, lay out the way he plans to deal with it.
It appears the President is not going to seek authorization from Congress, and that's something that you have said that you hope he would do. Can you explain why he should come to Congress?
Yeah, I think most of us, if we were in the White House, would say that we have the authority under the Constitution to take these matters on ourselves. He would cite Article 2. There's also the 2001 authorization, the original authorization relative to Afghanistan that's pretty broad, and if he wanted to pull ISIS in as one of the elements to be dealt with, I think he could. Now that's debatable, but I understand why he's taking the position he's taking. But what is beyond belief to me is, in spite of that, he still is not coming to Congress. If you look back in recent history, in 1991, President Bush 41 felt like he had the authorities. But he knew it was important to come to Congress and actually get the congressional buy-in, to get the nation to buy in to what was happening. Bush 43 did the same thing in 2001 in Afghanistan. He did the same thing in 2002 in Iraq. And then this president came to us a year ago on Syria to do the same thing. I helped write the authorization for the use of military force. We passed it out of committee. But the President never decided to not really take it on in Congress. I just think when you're considering taking on something that by his own words might take 3 years to do, when you're going to take us into another country, Syria, where we have not been engaged in military activity, regardless of what he feels about what his own authorities are, I think it's just lacking in judgment not to come to Congress to get Congress to buy in. The other thing that I think is very important is our allies in the region really don't trust this president after what he did a year ago in Syria, where he was planning to hit Syria, they were going to help, and then they watched on CNN where he had changed his mind and wasn't going to do that. And so we lack credibility in the region. And I think for the president to come to Congress, to sell Congress on the strategy and its objectives, to have his cabinet members up here testifying so that we can tease out what the elements of this are, and the American people can more fully understand what is happening, but then Congress approves it after he asks, he requests for that approval. I think it says a lot to the region about what our commitment is towards a sustained effort to deal with ISIS.
And finally, we're approaching a very sobering anniversary here in our country, September 11th. Talk a little bit about what the threat of terrorism looks like today with the threat of ISIS, and what threat do they pose to Americans? Yeah,
so I don't want to be one of those folks that's always overstating issues. I do think that today ISIS is focused in the region that they're in. I think they're really focused on building, quote, this caliphate, strengthening their position in Iraq and Syria. But I don't think there's any question that at the end of the day, the West, and especially the United States, the symbol of the West, is where they want to go. And what's worrisome right now is we have so many people that are being recruited from the West and from the United States. I mean, we know that people are reading these, watching these social networks. They're being attracted to, quote, the jihad from America. They have American passports. They can transit back and forth, and it's of concern. So not only do we have to deal with this from the standpoint of this mass of action that's taking place in Iraq and Syria with the most well-funded terrorist group ever, because as you know, they've taken over oil refineries, they're selling oil, they've extorted, they've kidnapped. The Iraqi military, when they ran, left behind a lot of U.S. equipment, so they're well equipped, they're well funded, they're well organized, and they have the ability to deal with social media like no other terrorist group has in the past. So we've got to deal with this on the ground and in the air, and I don't mean combat boots on the ground. I'm talking about building off the infrastructure that's there in Iraq and still to be determined in Syria. But we've also got to be cognizant that there are people in our own country that are drawn to these types of jihadist activities. And those are the people that pose a threat within our own nation. But then over time, I think as this conflict evolves, I do think that ISIS will over time begin to take steps against us here in the West. And so today the threat is there. Over time, I think the threat grows and becomes more of a problem for us here. And I think it's evident to Americans who've watched the video and know that this is the most brutal, demonic, grotesque group of terrorists that we've ever dealt with. And the best way for us to deal with it is right now diminish them. Now, in the process of doing it, let's recognize the fact that as we focus on ISIS, they will probably be able to recruit even more because they're seen as that terrorist group that really is standing up to the United States and the West. But we have to be vigilant, and I hope tonight the President will lay something out that's not, as he's mentioned before, something that just manages the problem, but really deals with this problem in the essence and ensures that as we move ahead, we do everything we can to make sure that Americans are safe.